A broken Navy SEAL thought he had lost everything: his home, his marriage, and the future he once fought to protect. But his loyal K9 never gave up on him. One night, beneath an abandoned lighthouse, the dog began digging, like he had heard a voice no human could hear. What his paws uncovered under the sand was not just a hidden steel hatch, but a buried secret that could expose greed, save lives, and give his master a reason to stand again. If you believe God can guide even a silent dog to a miracle, stay until the end, because this story proves that heaven sometimes answers pain with loyalty. The rain over Norfolk, Virginia, came down in a cold gray sheet that afternoon, washing the courthouse steps, blurring the traffic lights beyond the street, and turning the whole city into wet concrete, moving headlights, and silent faces passing beneath black umbrellas. Cole Bennett stepped out of the courthouse with the controlled posture of a man trained never to break in public, his shoulders still broad from years in the Navy, his jaw square and tight, his close-cropped brown hair touched with early gray, and a pale scar running from his left temple toward one cheekbone, a mark from a mission he never spoke about unless sleep dragged it out of him. At 44, the former Navy SEAL wore a full U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, long-sleeve blouse, and matching AOR 2 green digital camouflage trousers, brown combat boots, darkened by rain, no helmet, no tactical vest, only the uniform that still felt more honest than the life he had just lost. 17 years of marriage had ended inside that building without shouting, without mercy, and almost without sound, leaving him with no suburban home, no shared savings, no calm retirement, and no clear place to go. Lauren Bennett had not looked broken when it ended. She was 41, tall and slim, with polished blonde hair, pale blue eyes, a beige designer coat, and the kind of controlled expression that made strangers think she was graceful under pressure. Though Cole remembered when she had been softer, when every deployment frightened her, when every late-night call from an unknown number made her hands shake. Years of waiting, silence, nightmares, and disappointment had changed her into someone colder and sharper, a woman who now believed Cole had come back from war with too much damage and not enough ambition to be worth saving. Beside her had sat Paul Whitman, her lawyer, a narrow-faced man with silver glasses, careful hands, and a voice so calm it made every cruel sentence sound like routine paperwork. Lauren said Cole had become distant, that he startled at sudden noises, checked locks too often, slept too little, and spent more nights in the garage with Ranger than sitting beside her at dinners, charity events, and polished conversations with people who never understood why silence followed him everywhere. Cole did not argue, because part of what she said was true, though truth without love could still be used like a blade. He had changed after the last deployment, after the blast that damaged his knee, after the rescue mission that saved strangers but left pieces of him scattered in places no doctor could reach. What Lauren called weakness, Ranger had always recognized as survival. The 8-year-old German Shepherd K9 waited in the old black pickup outside the courthouse, sitting upright in the passenger seat with disciplined stillness, his sable and black coat thick from winter, his amber eyes alert, his ears sharp, his muzzle beginning to silver, and small scars hidden beneath his fur from missions most civilians would never believe. Ranger had been trained for tracking, detection, and protection, but to Cole he was more than a military dog. He was the partner who had stayed through gunfire, hospitals, panic attacks, divorce papers, and all the quiet hours when human voices felt too heavy to answer. When Cole opened the truck door, Ranger leaned across the seat and pressed his head against Cole's shoulder before the man could even sit fully behind the wheel, and that simple weight nearly did what the courthouse had failed to do. Cole dropped the divorce folder onto the dashboard, set 2 sea bags behind the seat, and looked once through the rain toward the courthouse doors, where Lauren disappeared beneath Whitman's umbrella without turning back. For a long moment, he did not start the engine. The city moved around him as if nothing had happened, tires hissing over wet pavement, office workers rushing toward dry lobbies, a siren fading somewhere near the harbor, while inside the truck, there was only the breathing of a man and the loyal patience of a dog who had never needed legal papers to understand where he belonged. "Looks like it's just us now, buddy," Cole murmured, his voice rough but steady, and Ranger's tail struck the seat once, firm and quiet, like a soldier accepting a final order. He drove south without music, leaving Norfolk behind as the road stretched toward North Carolina, past bridges, flat marshland, rain-dark pines, and long coastal highways where the Atlantic wind pushed sheets of mist across the windshield. Cole had no real plan beyond an old deed his father had left him in Cape Hatteras, a forgotten wooden house near an abandoned lighthouse, a place he had not visited since before his final years in the service. Henry Bennett, Cole's father, had been a quiet naval engineer with weathered hands, patient eyes, and a habit of keeping certain stories sealed behind long pauses, and though he had loved that coastal land deeply, he died before explaining why he refused to sell it even when money grew tight. Cole remembered him saying that land beside the sea could either swallow a man or teach him how to stand again. But at the time, Cole had been young, restless, and already chasing a military life that would take him far from home. Now, with nowhere else to go, those words followed him through the rain. By early evening, Cape Hatteras appeared through the gray weather in pieces. Weather-beaten cottages raised on pilings, shrimp boats rocking at their lines, a bait shop with a flickering sign, gulls cutting low across the road, and the old lighthouse rising beyond the dunes, like a tired guardian, half lost in fog. The air smelled of salt, wet rope, diesel, storm grass, and the kind of loneliness only coastal towns carried after tourist season faded. Cole turned onto a sandy lane nearly swallowed by beach grass and scrub pine, the pickup rocking through puddles while Ranger lifted his head and sniffed hard toward the open window. The Bennett house stood at the end of the lane, sagging behind a broken fence, with curled shingles, clouded windows, a porch leaning toward the sand, and weeds grown high enough to brush the truck doors. Cole parked and stared at it through the windshield, realizing this was not a fresh start yet, only a damaged place, waiting to see whether he had come to rebuild it or vanish inside it. Ranger jumped down first, paws sinking into wet sand, nose low as he circled the truck, porch, gate, and narrow path hidden beneath dune grass. Cole followed with one sea bag over his shoulder and an old footlocker dragging behind him. The front steps groaned under his boots. The door resisted, and the house released the stale smell of cedar, damp plaster, dust, and years without footsteps. Inside, there was a small living room with a stone fireplace, a cracked wooden table, 2 sheet-covered chairs, and walls stained where storms had slipped through the roof. Down the short hallway, one bedroom looked dry enough for the night if a man did not ask much from comfort. Cole stood in the center of the room while rain tapped through a leak near the kitchen, thinking Lauren would have called this place useless, proof that he was clinging to things with no value. But Ranger inspected every corner, every window, every shadow, and when the dog returned to his side, the ruin felt a little less empty. Near the fishing pier a mile away, Emily Carter watched the Bennett property from beneath the hood of a faded red rain jacket that had once belonged to her father. She was 15, thin and long-limbed, with wind-tangled brown hair, serious hazel eyes, and the guarded silence of a girl who had learned that grief made adults uncomfortable when it came with questions they did not want answered. Her father, Jack Carter, had been a local fisherman with sun-browned skin, gentle hands, and a reputation for honesty until he vanished 6 years earlier during a violent storm after telling Emily's mother he had seen strange lights near the dunes behind the abandoned lighthouse. Most people in town called it a tragic accident and stopped there, but Emily never believed that simple version. When she saw Cole's truck, the tall man in green digital camouflage, and the German shepherd patrolling the old Bennett yard, something in her chest tightened, as if a locked door in the past had shifted open by an inch. That night, Cole swept a path through the dust, cleared the fireplace, and spread an old blanket over the driest mattress, while wind moved around the house and the ocean breathed beyond the dunes. He sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing his damp uniform trousers, listening to the distant creak of the old lighthouse, and trying not to hear Lauren's voice telling a lawyer that he had become impossible to live with. Ranger lay beside the bed at first, head on his paws, breathing slow and steady, but sometime after midnight, when the rain faded into mist and moonlight silvered the wet sand outside the window, the dog suddenly lifted his head and rose without a sound. His ears locked forward, his body became still, and a low growl rolled from deep in his chest as he stared toward the dunes behind the lighthouse. Cole opened his eyes and followed the dog's gaze into the fog, seeing nothing but grass, sand, and the pale tower standing watch in the distance, never knowing that beneath that quiet dune lay a secret tied to his father, the land. and a truth that had waited years for the right man and the right dog to come home. Morning came to Cape Hatteras, with a pale strip of light breaking behind the Atlantic clouds, the kind of coastal morning where the wind carried salt through every crack in the walls, and the whole world seemed damp, gray, and awake before any man was ready for it. Cole Bennett stood on the porch of the old house, with a mug of bitter coffee in one hand and a roofing hammer in the other, wearing his U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, long-sleeve blouse and matching AOR, 2 green digital camouflage trousers, brown combat boots planted on warped boards, no helmet, no tactical vest, only the steady look of a former Navy SEAL trying to turn ruin into shelter. Ranger moved across the yard below him, the 8-year-old sable and black German Shepherd K9, sweeping the fence line with his nose low, his silvering muzzle wet with mist, his amber eyes catching every shift of grass, every gull cry, every hidden movement behind the dunes. And Cole watched him for a moment longer than necessary, because after the courthouse, after Lauren, after everything stripped away in Norfolk, the dog was the only proof that loyalty had not become extinct. The first days passed in the rough rhythm of survival, with Cole patching the worst hole in the roof before the next storm, clearing broken glass from the kitchen, dragging rotted boards from the hallway, resetting a leaning porch post, and pulling beach grass away from the broken fence until the shape of the old Bennett property began to show again under years of neglect. Work helped because work did not ask him what he had lost, and every nail driven into wet wood gave his hands something to do besides remember the divorce folder on the truck dashboard. But night still came with its own weather. When wind struck the walls and the lighthouse groaned somewhere beyond the dunes, Cole sometimes woke with his breath trapped in his chest, no longer in North Carolina but back inside a desert convoy, hearing metal tear open, hearing men shouting through smoke, feeling the old injury in his knee flare as if the blast had just happened. Ranger always rose before the panic could swallow him whole, placing his heavy head across Cole's forearm, breathing slowly, keeping the room real until the ocean replaced the gunfire, and the old house returned around them. On the 4th morning, after a night of broken sleep and hard rain, Ranger changed. Cole was hauling rusted wire from the fence line when the dog froze near the back of the yard, lifted his head toward the abandoned lighthouse, and took off without waiting for a command. "Ranger," Cole called, but the K9 had already crossed the dune grass, moving with the focused urgency of a dog that had caught a scent with weight behind it. Not a rabbit, not a bird, not some washed-up scrap from the tide. Cole followed through wet sand and saw Ranger halfway up the dune behind the lighthouse, digging with powerful, deliberate strikes of his front paws, throwing clumps of sand behind him, while his ears stayed locked forward and his body remained tense. "Easy, boy," Cole said, climbing toward him, but Ranger did not stop until Cole knelt beside the hole and saw something dark beneath the packed sand, a flat metal edge, rust-stained, straight, and too deliberately shaped to belong to the beach. Cole brushed sand away with both hands, then went back for a shovel from the shed, working beside Ranger under a brightening sky, while the lighthouse stood above them like a silent witness. The metal grew wider, heavier, and stranger with every pass of the shovel. Not a broken buoy, not an old boat panel, but a steel hatch set into a concrete frame beneath the dune, buried so deeply that beach grass had rooted over it for decades. Near the center, beneath salt corrosion and old brown rust, Cole found a faded insignia that made him stop breathing for a second. The outline of a United States Navy anchor. Below it, almost erased by time, were words he had to wipe twice before he could read them clearly. Naval Emergency Signal Station, 1968. Cole sat back on his heels, sweat and sand on his hands, feeling the training in him wake up cold and fast. His father had owned this land. His father had been a naval engineer, and now behind the lighthouse on that same land was a hidden Navy hatch nobody in town seemed to remember. From the lower path near the fishing pier, Emily Carter watched through the grass, keeping low behind a weather-bent fence post. She was 15, thin, long-legged, and serious in a faded red rain jacket, with wind-tangled brown hair and hazel eyes that always seemed older than her face, because 6 years of unanswered questions about her missing father had taught her to listen before trusting anyone. At first, she thought Cole might be connected to the developers, who had been asking about old coastal lots, because men in clean trucks and city shoes had come through before, smiling too much and measuring land they did not understand. But then a gull began thrashing near the driftwood below the dune, one wing tangled in a torn fishing net, and Ranger heard it before Cole did. The German shepherd ran down, not attacking, not barking wildly, only standing over the bird with careful authority, until Cole cut the net loose with his pocket knife and let the frightened creature flap back toward the surf. Emily saw Cole's hands, rough and steady, gentle with something wounded, and the fear inside her shifted into curiosity. She stepped out before she could change her mind. Cole turned quickly, one hand instinctively dropping toward his side before he recognized she was only a girl, though her face carried the stubborn courage of someone used to being dismissed. Emily told him her name, then glanced at Ranger, and said the dog was the first thing she had seen near that lighthouse that did not feel wrong. Cole studied her carefully, noticing the old jacket, the guarded voice, the way she kept looking at the dune as if it had stolen something from her. Emily finally told him her father, Jack Carter, had been a fisherman who vanished during a storm 6 years earlier, after saying there was a room under the lighthouse that did not belong to the town. Jack had been sun-browned, quiet, honest to a fault, the sort of man who fixed nets for widows and never drank before a voyage. And when the sea took him, everyone called it an accident because that was easier than admitting he might have found something dangerous. Cole did not promise her answers, but he did not laugh either, and that was enough to make Emily stay. By late afternoon, Cole managed to break the hatch seal with a pry bar. The steel groaned open with a deep, hollow sound that rolled through the dune like the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath for half a century. Cool air rose from below, dry and metallic, untouched by salt wind, and when Cole shined his flashlight down, the beam caught a ladder, descending into darkness, concrete walls, old cable conduits, and a narrow chamber waiting beneath the sand. He told Emily to stay above, told Ranger to hold, then climbed down slowly with the calm caution of a man who knew hidden places could kill the careless. At the bottom, his boots touched concrete dust, and the flashlight swept across maps, sealed under cloudy plastic. A military field radio, stacked medical crates, a compact generator, signal equipment, emergency rations, and steel cabinets marked with faded Navy inventory numbers. It was not treasure in the simple sense, not gold or cash or anything Lauren would have understood immediately, but it was history, infrastructure, and purpose, preserved beneath the lighthouse, while the world above forgot. Ranger descended after him despite Cole's warning, landing lightly and moving through the chamber with quiet intensity, while Emily's face appeared as a pale oval at the hatch above. Cole opened a file drawer near the radio desk and found folders brittle with age, each stamped with naval markings and coastal defense codes. Then he saw the signature on a maintenance report dated 1968, written in a firm hand he knew from old birthday cards, old tool labels, and the few letters his father had sent during long assignments. Henry Bennett. Cole stood very still, the flashlight shaking just slightly in his hand. His father had not merely kept an old beach property out of sentiment. He had maintained a hidden emergency signal station designed to protect the coast if war, storm, or national disaster cut the usual lines of communication. In the bottom drawer, behind a rusted lock Ranger had nosed at until Cole noticed it, lay one thinner folder tied with red string. On the front, in Henry's handwriting, were 5 words that made the chamber feel suddenly smaller. Do not let Caldwell know. That same evening, miles inland at a glass-walled real estate office near Wilmington, Brett Caldwell heard the first rumor. He was 52, tall, handsome, in a polished, expensive way, with silver-streaked dark hair, a smooth tan, and the patient smile of a man who treated every small town as land waiting to be converted into profit. Brett had inherited Caldwell Coastal Development from a father who taught him that history was useful only when it raised property value, and when a survey clerk mentioned that a former SEAL had returned to the Bennett place near the old Cape Hatteras Lighthouse and had been seen digging behind the dune with a military dog, Brett's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. He asked one quiet question, then another, and by the time the office lights reflected against the black windows, he was already looking at old maps of the Bennett property, already remembering a name his father once warned him never to say too loudly, and already understanding that whatever Cole Bennett had found under that lighthouse could ruin plans that had been moving silently for years. By the next morning, Cape Hatteras had traded rain for a hard coastal brightness, the kind of pale sunlight that made every wet board, rusted nail, and strip of beach grass look sharper than it had the day before. And Cole Bennett drove into the center of town with a canvas folder on the passenger seat, Ranger beside it, and sand still trapped in the seams of his brown combat boots. He wore the same U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, long-sleeve blouse, and matching AOR 2 green digital camouflage trousers. No helmet, no tactical vest, only the uniform of a man who had spent too many years trusting procedure before trusting people, and inside the folder were copied pages from the hidden signal station beneath the lighthouse, including his father's signature and the warning that had not left his mind since he read it. The sheriff's office sat between a bait shop and a small municipal building faded by salt air, with a flag snapping above the porch and 2 patrol trucks parked in front. And when Cole walked in with Ranger moving calmly at his left side, the woman at the front desk stared for half a second longer than polite, before calling toward the back, "Sheriff, you've got company." Sheriff Tom Harris stepped out of his office with a coffee mug in one hand and a face that looked as if the coast had carved it slowly over 60 years. He was a broad, gray-haired man with a weather-browned complexion, heavy eyebrows, and a calm, tired gaze that belonged to someone who had seen storms, ruin roofs, boats vanish, families break apart, and politicians promise help only after cameras arrived. Tom was not loud, and he did not waste words, but people in Cape Hatteras trusted him because he remembered who needed medicine during floods, which widows had bad steps on their porches, and which boys were trouble before they became criminals. When Cole placed the papers on his desk, and Tom saw the name Henry Bennett typed beneath an old Navy maintenance report, the sheriff's hand tightened around the mug. For a long moment, he said nothing, and that silence told Cole more than surprise ever could. Finally, Tom closed the office door, lowered himself into his chair, and said in a careful voice that Henry Bennett had once tried to stop a coastal development project because the dunes near the lighthouse were not just empty sand, but part of an old emergency communication line and storm drainage network built when the government feared the coast might one day need to survive without outside help. Cole listened without moving while Tom explained what little he knew. Years ago, before Cole's father died, there had been pressure to sell the land south of the lighthouse to developers who wanted a resort, parking access, and private beach frontage, but Henry had fought it quietly, warning the county that heavy construction could collapse buried service tunnels and block storm channels that carried floodwater away from the lower fishing district. Most people thought Henry was being stubborn because he never showed them the proof, and the men pushing the deal said the old engineer was clinging to worthless land. But Tom had known Henry well enough to understand that fear was not the reason he refused. The station under the lighthouse, if Cole's papers were accurate, could still connect old radio lines, hold emergency power, store water, and shelter people during a major hurricane. And for the first time since finding the hatch, Cole felt the meaning of the land shift under his feet. It was not inheritance in the ordinary sense. It was responsibility. That afternoon, because Ranger had been limping slightly after scraping himself near the rusted hatch, Tom sent Cole to the only veterinarian in town. And that was how Sarah Whitaker entered the story with a white coat rolled to her elbows, a braid of dark auburn hair falling over one shoulder, and green eyes that had learned to stay kind without becoming naive. Sarah was 38, tall and lean, with sun-browned arms, a quiet laugh, and the direct manner of a woman who had spent more nights saving injured animals than attending parties. And people said she became that way after losing her younger brother in a boating accident when she was 20, a loss that made her gentle with wounded creatures and impatient with anyone who treated pain as weakness. Her small clinic smelled of antiseptic, dog shampoo, and cedar shavings, with an old orange tabby named Captain sleeping on the reception counter, one torn ear twitching whenever Ranger passed. Sarah examined Ranger's paw and shoulder with steady hands, speaking to him as if he were a decorated veteran rather than a pet, and Ranger, who did not relax easily around strangers, allowed it after one long look at Cole. "He trusts you," Sarah said, wrapping the scrape. Cole answered that Ranger had earned the right to choose carefully, and Sarah glanced at him with a softness that suggested she understood the sentence had not been only about the dog. Emily Carter arrived at the clinic before sunset, with a small object wrapped in cloth and the anxious expression of someone who had spent all day deciding whether trust was a mistake. She looked smaller indoors than she had beneath the lighthouse, her red jacket damp at the cuffs, her brown hair windblown, but her hazel eyes were fierce as she placed the bundle on the examination table and unwrapped an old brass compass scratched by salt and age. It had belonged to Jack Carter, her father, and inside the lid, almost hidden beneath tarnish, were numbers carved with the point of a knife, coordinates near the marsh side of the lighthouse property. Emily said her father kept the compass in a tackle box nobody else touched, and a week before he vanished, he told her that if anything happened to him, the lighthouse had more than one door. Cole did not speak for several seconds. Sarah looked from Emily to Cole, then to Ranger, while the German shepherd leaned forward and sniffed the compass carefully, his ears lifting as if the old brass carried more than memory. When Ranger turned toward the clinic door with sudden focus, Cole knew the dog had found a trail worth following. They reached the marsh near dusk, moving through reeds, soft sand, and shallow pools where the wind pushed ripples across black water, with Ranger leading and the others following in a line behind him. The place smelled of salt, mud, and decaying grass, and mosquitoes drifted in clouds near the bank, but Ranger did not slow until he reached a low mound, half buried beneath sand and roots, near a rusted ventilation pipe, barely visible above the ground. Cole cleared the opening with a folding shovel from the truck, while Emily held the flashlight and Sarah kept one hand gently on the girl's shoulder, not forcing comfort, just offering presence. Beneath the clogged vent was a narrow maintenance crawlspace, leading toward a small storage alcove connected to the old system. And inside, tucked behind a corroded metal panel, Cole found a sealed waterproof pouch. Emily knew before he opened it. Her face lost color, and when Cole pulled out a weather-stained notebook marked with Jack Carter's name, the marsh seemed to go quiet around them. The notebook did not give them everything, but it gave them enough. Jack had discovered that Brett Caldwell and Brett's father before him had spent years trying to bury records of the storm drainage network, not because the tunnels were useless, but because acknowledging them would prevent major construction near the lighthouse and destroy the resort plan. The notes described missing survey pages, county files that vanished after private meetings, and warnings that if the drainage channels were blocked, a major hurricane could push water into the fishing district with deadly force. Emily held the notebook against her chest with both hands, and for the first time since Cole had met her, her face looked less like a girl chasing a ghost and more like a daughter standing beside proof. Cole did not tell her it would be all right, because men who had survived war knew better than to cheapen truth with easy promises. He only said her father had not imagined it, and that one sentence made Emily close her eyes as if she had been carrying a weight alone for 6 years. While Cole, Sarah, Emily, and Ranger stood in the marsh with Jack Carter's notebook between them, Brett Caldwell was making his next move from a private office lit by polished lamps and city ambition. He called Lauren Bennett, who was living in a rented luxury apartment and quietly discovering that the investments she had trusted after the divorce were not as secure as she had believed. Lauren still looked composed, still slim and elegant in silk blouses and expensive jewelry, but there was strain now around her eyes, the kind money trouble creates when pride refuses to admit fear. Brett told her that Cole's coastal property might contain a preserved military installation, possibly valuable, possibly protected, possibly worth millions if handled correctly, and he said it in the smooth voice of a man offering opportunity while hiding the hook beneath it. Lauren listened in silence, thinking of the land she had dismissed as useless, thinking of the husband she had left with a truck and a dog, and by the time the call ended, she had already begun searching the distance from Norfolk to Cape Hatteras. That night, Cole returned to the Bennett house with the copied papers locked in his footlocker and Jack Carter's notebook hidden beneath a loose board near the fireplace, because instinct told him the secret was no longer sleeping. The wind had shifted, the sea was dark beyond the dunes, and Ranger refused to settle, pacing once from the door to the window before stopping so abruptly that Cole reached for the flashlight without asking why. Outside, moonlight lay thin across the sand, and near the path leading to the buried hatch behind the lighthouse, Ranger lowered his nose, followed a scent, then gave a low warning growl. Cole crouched beside him and saw fresh footprints pressed into the damp sand, larger than Emily's, deeper than Sarah's, angled toward the hatch and back again. Beside one print lay a cigarette butt with a gold band around the filter, expensive, imported. and too clean to have washed in with the tide. Cole picked it up with a scrap of cloth, looked toward the dark dune, and knew with cold certainty that someone had come onto his land while he was gone. By the end of that week, the Bennett house no longer looked like a place waiting to collapse into the sand, because Cole had patched the worst parts of the roof, rebuilt the front steps, cleared the weeds from the path, and strung warm yellow light through the windows each evening, so that from the road, the old cedar structure looked less like a forgotten inheritance, and more like a man quietly refusing to disappear. The morning Lauren Bennett arrived, the sky over Cape Hatteras was bright but uneasy, with high gray clouds gathering far out above the Atlantic and a humid wind pressing the dune grass flat in long silver waves. Cole stood near the porch in his U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, long-sleeve blouse, and matching AOR, 2 green digital camouflage trousers, brown combat boots planted in the sand, no helmet, no tactical vest, one hand resting on a repaired fence post, while Ranger watched the road beside him. The sleek black SUV that rolled up the sandy lane did not belong to the town, and before Cole saw the driver's face, Ranger had already gone still, his sable and black body squared, ears forward, amber eyes fixed on the vehicle, with a memory no divorce paper could erase. Lauren stepped out wearing cream-colored slacks, a fitted navy blouse, and dark sunglasses that made her look composed from a distance, though when she removed them, Cole saw tension beneath the polish, a tightness around her mouth, a restlessness in her pale blue eyes that had not been there in the courthouse. She looked around the property and seemed almost offended by its improvement, by the straightened fence, the small vegetable bed near the porch, the stacked firewood, the patched roof, the steady light in the window, and the man in front of her who no longer looked like someone waiting for permission to breathe. "You've been busy," she said, and Cole answered that the place needed work, nothing more. Ranger moved one step forward, not barking, not lunging, only placing himself between them with the silent authority of a K9 that remembered every cold look she had ever given him, and every time she had blamed him for keeping Cole tied to a life she wanted him to forget. Lauren did not pretend long. She said she had heard rumors that Cole had found some kind of military structure under the property, possibly old government infrastructure, possibly valuable, and because the land had existed during their marriage, she believed any financial benefit might still involve her. Cole looked at her for a long moment, hearing the ocean behind the dunes, feeling the old anger rise and pass without taking command. He reminded her calmly that in court she had called the Bennett land useless, a burden, a decaying coastal lot with no real value, and that she had refused to claim it when the settlement was drawn. Lauren's face hardened, but her silence told him she remembered. "That was before I knew what was here," she said. Cole nodded slightly, because there it was, clear and honest in the worst way. She had not driven to Cape Hatteras because she missed him, or because guilt had finally grown heavier than pride. She had come because something under the sand might be worth taking. While Lauren stood in Cole's yard trying to reopen a door she had slammed shut herself, Brett Caldwell began working the town from the other direction. He arrived not with threats at first, but with smiles, glossy renderings, clean shirts, and promises spoken inside the diner, the bait shop, and the small meeting room behind the municipal office. Brett was 52, polished and handsome in the artificial way of men who knew lighting, mirrors, and money, with silver-streaked dark hair, a smooth tan, and a patient smile that made older residents feel listened to while he measured their desperation. He told fishermen that a resort would bring customers, told young families it would bring jobs, told county officials it would bring tax revenue, and told anyone willing to listen that the old military site under the Bennett land could be unstable, dangerous, and better handled by private experts. Some people shook their heads because they still remembered Henry Bennett, but others, tired of storm damage, low wages, and children leaving town for work, began to wonder if maybe Caldwell's money was the only future anyone was offering. Emily Carter learned how dangerous that kind of future could be when she tried to bring her father's notebook to Sheriff Tom Harris before sunset. She moved quickly along the back road near the fishing pier, the notebook tucked under her jacket, her thin frame bent against the wind, when a white utility truck slowed beside her. The man who stepped out was Ray Mercer, one of Caldwell's field supervisors, a heavy-shouldered man in his late 30s with a shaved head, a sunburned neck, and flat gray eyes that rarely blinked, the kind of man who spoke softly because he enjoyed making people lean close enough to feel afraid. He asked what she was carrying, then told her some papers belonged to adults, not girls chasing ghost stories. And when Emily backed away toward the pier, the tide had already begun pushing high around the pilings. Ray did not touch her, not quite, but he stepped close enough to make the warning clear before driving away and leaving her trapped between the rising water, the slick boards, and the panic she refused to show. Ranger found her before Cole did. The K9 had been restless since Lauren's visit, pacing the yard and lifting his nose toward the wind, until suddenly he broke from the porch and ran toward the fishing pier with a sharp bark that cut through the evening. Cole followed in the truck, Sarah Whitaker beside him after he had called her from the clinic, and when they reached the pier, they saw Emily clinging to a crossbeam above dark water, her red jacket soaked, one shoe missing, the notebook pressed under her arm. Sarah, tall in lean-in jeans, rubber boots, and a rain jacket, moved with the practical calm of a woman who had spent years saving frightened animals and grieving people without making either feel weak, while Cole tied a rope around his waist and stepped onto the flooded boards. Ranger went first, low and sure-footed, reaching Emily and pressing his body against her legs until she stopped shaking long enough for Cole to pull her back. When she was safe on the road, Emily wrapped both arms around Ranger's wet neck and whispered that he had saved her, and from that moment the dog was no longer only Cole's partner in her eyes, but the first guardian Cape Hatteras had given her since her father vanished. The weather report came that night while Cole, Sarah, Emily, and Sheriff Tom stood inside the Bennett house with wet jackets hanging by the door and Jack Carter's notebook open on the table. The television signal flickered, then steadied enough to show a red spiral forming over the Atlantic, a storm system strengthening faster than expected, with a projected path bending toward the Outer Banks within days. Tom's face tightened as the meteorologist spoke of storm surge, heavy rainfall, and low-lying coastal flooding, and Cole understood the danger before anyone had to say it. If Jack Carter's notes were right, and if Caldwell's people had already interfered with records or access points, the blocked drainage channels beneath the lighthouse could turn the lower fishing district into a bowl, trapping water where families lived. Lauren, still in town after failing to get what she wanted from Cole, watched from the edge of the room with her arms folded, saying little, but her eyes moved between the notebook, the storm map, and Ranger as if she was beginning to understand that the thing she had dismissed as a dog and the land she had dismissed as worthless might matter more than all the money she had chased. After everyone left, Cole went back down into the hidden signal station with Ranger at his side and opened the last sealed folder from Henry Bennett's cabinet. The air below the lighthouse was cool and dry, the old generator silent in the corner, the radio desk covered with maps, and for a moment, Cole felt his father's presence more strongly than he had in years, not as a ghost, but as a man who had prepared for a day his son might have to face. Inside the folder was a notarized document, yellowed but intact, signed by Henry Bennett and witnessed by 2 county officials, long retired or dead, stating that the Bennett property was never to be sold for private development if the lighthouse station, drainage network, or emergency shelter remained capable of serving the public. It was to be maintained, protected, and made available to the people of Cape Hatteras in times of coastal disaster. Cole read the final line twice while Ranger sat beside him, still and watchful, and above them, the first distant thunder rolled across the ocean. The storm reached Cape Hatteras after dark, rolling in from the Atlantic like a wall of black water and wind, bending the dune grass flat, shaking the patched windows of the Bennett house, and driving rain sideways so hard that it looked less like weather and more like the ocean trying to climb onto land. Cole Bennett stood on the porch in his U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, long-sleeve blouse, and matching AOR-2 green digital camouflage trousers, dark beneath a rain jacket, brown combat boots planted against the trembling boards. No helmet, no tactical vest, only the steady presence of a former Navy SEAL who had learned long ago that fear became useful only when a man gave it orders. Beside him, Ranger faced the road with water streaming from his sable and black coat, his silvering muzzle lifted into the wind, his amber eyes alert as headlights appeared one by one through the storm. First Sheriff Tom Harris's patrol truck, then Sarah Whitaker's clinic van, then pickups from the fishing district, where families had started to panic as the streets filled faster than anyone expected. By the time the town power failed, the lower road near the pier was already underwater, and the people who arrived at the Bennett property came with soaked children, shivering grandparents, pets wrapped in towels, and the stunned expressions of families who had believed the storm would turn north until it did not. Mae Dawson was among the first, a 70-year-old widow with a thin white braid, a flowered housecoat under a plastic poncho, and a stubborn dignity that made her refuse help until Sarah quietly took her elbow and guided her toward the dune. Eli Burns came behind her, a broad fisherman in his 50s with a gray beard, cracked hands, and fear hidden behind a rough voice as he carried his asthmatic grandson against his chest. Cole did not waste time explaining the history of the place. He opened the steel hatch beneath the lighthouse, checked the ladder, and sent Ranger to the entrance, where the K9 stood like a living marker in the rain, guiding each person down with calm discipline, while Sheriff Tom counted heads and Emily Carter held a flashlight steady with both hands. Below the dune, the old Naval Emergency Signal Station woke under pressure. Cole brought the generator online, and yellow light trembled across concrete walls, steel cabinets, maps, water tanks, radio equipment, blankets, and medical crates that had waited decades for a night exactly like this. Sarah moved through the chamber with practiced warmth, tall and lean in her soaked jacket, auburn braid darkened by rain, checking Mae Dawson's pulse, calming frightened children, and wrapping a towel around Emily's shoulders when the girl refused to admit she was shaking. Lauren stood near the wall in a cream raincoat now streaked with mud, her polished appearance stripped down by the storm, watching Cole move between people with quiet authority, not frantic, not broken, not the useless man she had described in court, but a leader who saw danger clearly and made others feel safer simply by refusing to panic. Ranger stayed near the hatch, wet paws planted on concrete, ears tracking every sound above and below, accepting gentle pats from children without ever taking his attention off the entrance. Brett Caldwell arrived when the storm was near its worst, not to help, but to stop what he could no longer control. He came through the maintenance crawl space near the marsh, with Ray Mercer behind him, both men soaked, angry, and desperate, and Brett's expensive coat clung to his shoulders, while his smooth face showed, for the first time, the ugliness beneath the charm. He hissed that Cole had no authority to open the station, that the site was unsafe, that the county would be liable, but his eyes kept moving toward the file cabinets, the maps, the proof that the drainage system existed and that his resort plan had always depended on making people forget it. While voices rose near the main chamber, Brett slipped toward a side control room where the generator transfer panel hummed behind a rusted metal door. Ranger saw him before anyone else did. The German Shepherd launched down the narrow corridor with a sharp bark, and Cole followed just in time to see Brett reaching for the breaker lever with one hand and stuffing a folded map into his coat with the other. The corridor became chaos for only a few seconds, but in those seconds the truth showed itself. Brett shoved past a cabinet. Ray grabbed at Cole, and Ranger drove forward between them, forcing Brett away from the panel before the developer could cut power to the shelter. A strip of rusted sheet metal broke loose under Ranger's paw, slicing into the pad near his front leg, and the dog stumbled once, blood mixing with rainwater on the concrete, but he did not retreat. Cole pinned Ray against the wall with the controlled force of a man who knew exactly how much strength was necessary, while Sheriff Tom arrived behind him and snapped handcuffs onto the supervisor's wrists. Brett, pale and furious, tried to say it was a misunderstanding, but the stolen map was already half visible beneath his coat, and Lauren, standing at the corridor entrance, saw everything without needing Cole to explain it. She saw the man who had promised wealth trying to kill the lights on terrified families, and she saw the dog she had called a burden bleeding quietly while still guarding the doorway. Then Emily found what her father had left behind. In the confusion after Brett was restrained, she opened Jack Carter's notebook again and noticed a page that had stuck to the back cover, softened by age but still readable beneath Sarah's flashlight. The drawing showed the old storm drainage route from the Lighthouse dune to the marsh outlet, with one valve marked in her father's handwriting and a warning that if that valve stayed closed during a surge, water would back into the fishing district. Emily's face went pale, then fierce, and she handed the notebook to Cole as if handing him her father's final breath. Cole studied the map once, then looked toward Tom, who nodded because there was no time to debate. With Ranger limping but still determined beside him, Cole moved through the side passage to the old drainage chamber. turned the corroded wheel with both hands, and felt the valve fight him until years of salt and neglect finally gave way. Somewhere beyond the concrete, water roared like a released animal, shifting away from the homes near the pier and tearing toward the marsh channel where it should have gone all along. For a moment, it seemed as if the worst had passed, and then the radio crackled with a call from the fishing district. 3 children were missing from the shelter count, last seen near a storage shed behind the bait shop before the road flooded. Their mother, Denise Miller, a young waitress with dark curls plastered to her face and terror in her voice, collapsed against Sarah when she heard it, saying their names over and over: Grace, Tyler, and little Sam. Cole did not hesitate, though Tom warned the wind outside was strong enough to throw debris like knives. Ranger, injured paw wrapped quickly by Sarah, pushed past Cole's leg and lifted his nose toward the hatch, catching a scent under the salt, gasoline, and floodwater. Cole looked at him once and understood. They went into the storm together, man and K9 moving through the back dune path Ranger chose, avoiding the deepest water by cutting behind the lighthouse and down a sand ridge where the grass broke the wind just enough to keep them upright. They found the children trapped inside the bait shop storage shed, water rising around the pallets, the roof already tearing loose at one corner. Grace was 12, and trying to keep her younger brothers calm with a courage too large for her small face. Tyler was 9 and white with fear, and Sam, only 6, clutched a plastic dinosaur against his chest as Ranger pushed through the broken doorway and went straight to them. Cole tied the rescue line around each child, sending them out one by one, while wind screamed through the gaps and boards ripped from the roof above. Ranger stayed until the last child was against Cole's chest, then guided them back through the dune path, limping now but refusing to slow. And moments after they reached the hatch, the storage shed roof tore away into the darkness behind them. Inside the station, Denise gathered her children with a cry that silenced the whole chamber, and Lauren lowered her eyes, shame finally stronger than pride as Ranger stood bleeding at the entrance until the last person was safe below. By dawn, the storm had moved inland, leaving Cape Hatteras battered, flooded, and strangely quiet beneath a sky washed clean with pale gold light. The people climbed out of the station one by one, blinking at the damaged dunes, broken signs, scattered boards, and flooded roadways. But there were no covered bodies, no missing children, no grieving families standing where help had come too late. Mae Dawson touched Cole's arm as she passed. Eli Burns nodded with tears he did not bother hiding, and Sheriff Tom looked across the crowd as if seeing the Bennett land for what Henry had always known it was. Sarah knelt beside Ranger and checked the wounded paw, while Emily stood close enough for the dog to lean against her knee, the notebook of Jack Carter pressed safely under her jacket. Cole looked toward the lighthouse, then toward the people gathered beneath it, and only then did they seem to understand that the former SEAL and the loyal K9 had not simply opened an old bunker in a storm. They had saved the town. Morning after the storm came slowly over Cape Hatteras, not with celebration at first, but with the stunned silence of a town counting what had survived, as pale sunlight spread across flooded roads, broken dockboards, overturned crab traps, torn signs, and the old lighthouse standing above the battered dunes, like it had watched the whole night without blinking. Cole Bennett walked through the lower fishing district in his U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, long-sleeve blouse, and matching AOR-2 green digital camouflage trousers, brown combat boots splashing through shallow water, no helmet, no tactical vest, only a rain-stained jacket over the uniform, and Ranger limping faithfully beside him with one front paw bandaged by Sarah Whitaker. The 8-year-old sable and black German Shepherd K9 looked tired, his silvering muzzle damp, his amber eyes still alert. But every person who saw him stepped aside with quiet respect, because by sunrise, everyone knew that the dog had stood in the storm, found the lost children, stopped the power from being cut, and stayed at the hatch until the last family was safe. Inside the hidden station beneath the lighthouse, Sheriff Tom Harris began laying the truth out piece by piece, not as rumor anymore, but as evidence. He placed Henry Bennett's protected land document beside Jack Carter's notebook, then added the drainage map, the stolen map Brett Caldwell had tried to hide in his coat, and old county records showing missing survey pages and falsified risk reports. Tom, broad and gray-haired with the careful patience of a man who hated drama but respected proof, looked older that morning, yet steadier than ever. And when Deputy Nora Reed arrived from the county office, a compact woman in her early 30s, with dark cropped hair, sharp brown eyes, and the no-nonsense posture of someone who had grown up in a law enforcement family, she photographed every page and sealed every folder in evidence bags. Brett Caldwell tried to stand tall even while his expensive coat was ruined by salt water and mud, but the charm was gone from his face, and when Tom charged him with sabotage, witness intimidation, and fraud connected to the land filings, Brett stared at Cole as if still trying to buy his way out of a truth that no longer belonged to him. Ray Mercer was taken in the same patrol truck, quiet now, his hard gray eyes turned toward the floor, while Brett continued protesting that he had only been protecting the public from an unsafe structure, though nobody standing in that chamber believed him, after watching that same structure shelter half the town through the worst night Cape Hatteras had seen in years. Lauren Bennett stood near the stairwell as the deputies led Brett away, her cream raincoat streaked with sand, her blonde hair loose from the storm, her face pale in a way Cole had never seen during the divorce. Because greed looked different when it had nowhere left to hide, she had come to the coast believing Cole had found something worth money. But now, she had seen what he had actually found. A duty his father left behind. A girl's proof that her father had died trying to warn people, a town that would have drowned without the truth, and a wounded dog who had shown more courage than the men chasing profit. Later that afternoon, after the water began to pull back from the roads, and the first repair crews moved through town, Lauren asked to speak to Cole alone near the porch of the Bennett house. She no longer looked like the woman who had walked out of the courthouse without turning back. The sharpness was still there, but it had cracked around the edges, revealing exhaustion, fear, and something close to shame. She told him she had been wrong, not in the dramatic way people speak when they want forgiveness quickly, but slowly, as if each word had to pass through pride before reaching honesty. She admitted she had called him useless because she did not know how to live beside his pain, that she had judged Ranger as only a dog because it was easier than admitting the dog had stayed when she could not, and that she had mistaken money for safety until the storm showed her how little money mattered when water was rising and the lights were going out. Cole listened without anger, one hand resting on Ranger's head, and when she finished, he told her he forgave her, but forgiveness did not mean returning to the place that had broken him. Emily Carter found her own ending in a quieter corner of the Lighthouse station, where Cole handed her back the brass compass and Jack Carter's notebook, now copied for the investigation, but still hers, in the only way that mattered. The girl stood very still, her wind-tangled brown hair tucked behind one ear, her hazel eyes red from a night without sleep, and for the first time since Cole had met her, she did not look like someone chasing a ghost across the dunes. She read the final marked page again, the one showing the drainage valve her father had discovered, and the truth settled over her with pain and pride tangled together. Jack Carter had not abandoned his family, and he had not died because he was careless. He had died trying to protect a town that later forgot why he had been afraid. Cole told her that some men never got monuments, but that did not mean their courage disappeared, and Emily held the compass against her chest, while Ranger leaned gently against her knee, as if the canine understood that grief sometimes needed a living creature to bear part of its weight. Sarah treated Ranger in the clinic 2 days later, after the town roads cleared enough for people to move safely again, and the small building became crowded in a way it had never been crowded before. Children arrived with drawings of Ranger standing in front of the lighthouse. Fishermen brought fresh food. Mae Dawson brought a blanket she had knitted with trembling, but determined hands. And Eli Burns came with his grandson, the boy Ranger had helped protect through the storm, carrying a paper sign that read, "The Lighthouse, K9, in uneven blue letters. Sarah, tall and lean in her white coat, auburn braid over one shoulder, smiled through tired eyes as she changed Ranger's bandage, and told Cole the wound would heal, though the old dog would need rest whether he approved of that order or not. Ranger accepted the attention with soldierly patience, allowing children to touch his neck and scratch behind his ears while keeping one eye on Cole, because even in celebration, his duty remained simple. Stay close, watch everything, leave no one behind. In the weeks that followed, Cape Hatteras changed around the Bennett land. Mayor Evelyn Price, a soft-spoken woman in her late 50s with silver curls, round glasses, and the practical kindness of someone who had spent years stretching small-town budgets through hurricane seasons, stood beside Sheriff Tom and signed the agreement that formally recognized the Lighthouse Station as a protected emergency shelter. Cole did not sell the land, and he did not turn it into a monument to himself. Instead, he used Henry Bennett's document, Jack Carter's evidence, and the town's support to create the Bennett Coastal Rescue and Canine Recovery Center, a place where the underground station would be restored for storms. The old house would shelter veterans who needed quiet work and open air, and retired working dogs could rest, heal, and still feel useful. Sarah helped organize medical supplies. Emily volunteered after school. Tom secured emergency radios. And slowly, the property that Lauren once called worthless became the safest place on the coast. By late autumn, the lighthouse shone again. Its restored beams swept across the dark Atlantic at sunset, passing over the repaired dunes, the rebuilt fence, the Bennett house glowing warmly below, and the children laughing near the path where they had painted small wooden signs for the new center. Cole stood on the lighthouse balcony, in his green digital camouflage uniform, one hand on the rail and the other resting on Ranger's head, while below them, Emily laughed with the younger children. Sarah checked a first aid kit near the station entrance. Sheriff Tom spoke with the fishermen, and Lauren's final letter of apology sat unopened, but no longer heavy inside Cole's desk. Ranger sat tall beside him, ears lifted, injured paw healed, eyes on the sea as if still guarding every soul beneath that light. And Cole looked down at the dog who had dug beneath a dune and uncovered not just a hidden station, but a future. "You didn't just find a bunker, old friend," he said softly, as the lighthouse beam crossed the water. "You found my life again." Ranger leaned against his leg, and after years of darkness, the old lighthouse did not simply guide ships home anymore. It guided lost people back to themselves. Sometimes God does not bring us back to the place we lost everything to punish us, but to show us that he had been preparing a miracle there all along. Cole thought the old lighthouse was only a broken memory, and Ranger was only the last friend left beside him. But through loyalty, courage, and faith, that forgotten place became a shelter. That wounded dog became a hero, and that broken man found his purpose again. In everyday life, we may also face moments when people leave us, when doors close, when we feel forgotten, or when the future looks like nothing but ruins. But this story reminds us that God can hide blessings beneath the very ground we are afraid to step on. He can use a loyal friend, a painful ending, a storm, or even a simple act of courage to lead us toward a new beginning. Never look down on loyalty, never give up on people who are wounded, and never believe that your life is over just because one chapter ended badly. May God bless every person watching this. Protect your family, heal your heart, guide your steps, and send loyal souls into your life when you need them most. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment Amen if you believe God can turn pain into purpose, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about faith, loyalty, courage, and second chances.